Welcome to the Movement PT Coffee Cast, where we sit down and talk about physical therapy, health, and whatever else comes to mind during our coffee-infused conversations. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Movement PT Coffee Cast. My name's Dalton, and with me, as always, is my beautifully bearded friend, William. William, how are we doing today?
I'm doing pretty good, man. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm not gonna lie. I'm a little on the fatigued side. Just a little bit. It's been a long week as we record this podcast. It's Friday, so I'm pumped for the weekend, but I'm also a little fatigued. But I've been drinking coffee, so I'm getting up. I'm getting up for this episode.
I'm glad you're here to hear you're ready to go.
I'm always ready to go, man. At least I pretend like I'm ready to go.
That's all you got to do.
Yeah, man. One thing I want to talk about before we dive into like our conversation today was maybe me and you can just talk a little bit about our experience like doing that live podcast at Western the other day. That was a first for us on the PT Coffee Cast, and I mean, I know you had quite a good time, and it was fun. It was fun for me also. So I want to hear maybe some of your thoughts about how that went. And
oh man, first of all, shout out to all of the Western students who
shout
were there.
out.
That was super fun, because it's just so cool to see. You know what I think stood out to me actually is just the questions that they were asking us.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like people are becoming more and more aware, partly because of like things like the Level Up initiative, where people are really aware of like biopsychosocial model and starting to dive into like things like pain science and motivational interviewing and that type of stuff earlier now, even in comparison to when we were in school.
Yeah, I would agree. And you can see, I mean, we talked to only a few people, but like just the interest and the curiosity in like the students to like learn more about what's out there, and that
Yeah.
they can see how like those things are having big influences on the people they're seeing.
Yeah, totally. Plus, it was fun just like bringing the coffee there and, having everybody drinking it and seeing that they were enjoying it was super awesome.
Yeah, man, it's cool because like we sat in that room, I don't know how many damn hours when we were in that program. And it was cool to be able to like go back there, not even, I mean, a year later since like the last time we sat in that room, and be at the front and kind of tell our story. It was kind of surreal. I don't think I really realized it in the moment, but like after, when me and you were kind of talking about it, and even now as I like think about it, it's like, it's pretty cool, man, to see how like full circle and how, far we've come from the very first podcast episode we've done, or even the very first Instagram post that we've posted. So it's pretty cool.
So true, man. And
Yeah.
What was awesome was like, if I'm being honest with myself, I think before I was a little bit nervous, just
Oh yeah.
like speaking in front of that many people. Like, we don't do that often, right? But once the podcast started, it's like we've done it so many times, it just felt like we were just hanging out recording on the podcast.
Yeah.
And it felt so right.
No, man, I agree. So if there's any other schools out there that want us to come and do a live podcast at their school, hit us up. We're down.
We will do it. We will do it for sure.
All right, man, let's dive into the topic that we're going to talk about today. I'm going to let you kind of intro it, and then me and you can kind of just vibe off of our thoughts for the people.
Yeah, I don't know how this post that we did, we put it out a while ago.
Yeah, I think I have when we put it out right here, June 14th, 2018.
Wow, so like
a year ago.
over a year ago.
Yeah.
But I think somebody posted it, and so it kind of got brought back
Circulating.
to life. But
Yeah.
do you want to read? Do you have the post up there?
Yeah, I
What's he
do.
saying?
Yeah. So it was a post we made about how it's important to modify activity rather than eliminate it. So it's a little graphic of a dude doing a kettlebell deadlift, and it says a good physical therapist will modify your activity rather than eliminate it. And the gist of like the caption was just talking about how we should be movement optimists and we should be focused on keeping people as active as possible. And keeping them engaged in like their meaningful activities. And then as physical therapists, we sit in a good position with our understanding of pain and our ability to assess and understand movements and biomechanics, and how we can keep people doing the activities that they enjoy without just like cutting them off completely.
Yeah, for sure. I think just before we talk about it more, we should probably just clear the air that physical therapist could easily be replaced by any other activity related health professional or strength coach or doctor, you name it, like could be any of those too.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as like why we made it, I think it's just because we have had experiences, whether it's like with ourselves or when we were on placements, of seeing examples of people or healthcare professionals like shutting down people's activity immediately without giving much thought as to why they were doing that or how that's impacting the person. And so we feel strongly that before you decide to like eliminate an activity completely, probably temporarily at least, you should make an effort to figure out if there's a way to sort of modify the activity and keep the person in whatever the thing that they're doing is.
Yeah, for sure. That was basically the gist of it. I know this was something like when we posted this, it kind of was on the trend of like where we started to shift our mindset and like how we were going to approach care based off of like what we were reading, who we were listening to on podcasts, like all of that kind of thing. And when we started to adopt this mindset of like a movement optimism, having movement optimism, and then making sure we're not taking away activities, it really opened our eyes and gave us a new light into like the approach to care. How has that kind of like translated into some of the things that you do now, like maybe some potential like examples that we could talk about as how you could see this like be put into practice?
Yeah, well, I think, just in case there are people listening who like don't really know what do we mean by like movement optimism? So I think like how I would think about that is like neither of us really view like a certain activity. Let's just throw a couple out there, like running, weightlifting, overhead pressing, like things that kind of like
deadlifting.
Yeah, deadlifting. Like we don't view any of these things as harmful for the body inherently.
Mm-hmm.
We view maybe more based off of like a preparation model. And so people can get hurt and have pain, and that may not necessarily be that related to like poor technique or improper like body kinematics or something like that.
Right.
And so that's kind of what we mean by movement optimists, is like we view the person as temporarily sensitized to certain positions. And then our aim is to hopefully maybe calm that down initially with some modifications and then develop the capacity to get back to those movements.
Yeah, man, that was very well said, bro.
Thank you.
I also think it's important to mention that it's not like that we don't care about the way someone moves. Like,
right.
You know what I mean? Like we're not, if it looks really shitty, then it probably is, but
Mhm.
there's certain ways that you can go about like it, like I don't even want to say correcting, helping guide that person to maybe
Mhm.
move more optimally for what they're trying to
Right.
do. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's context dependent, right?
Right.
Which is kind of what you're hitting on there. Like,
Yeah.
uh, it really depends on the person and what they're trying to do, and what is sort of what movements they are sensitive to, and how that goes into your like thought process.
Hmm.
But maybe we can get into some of the examples.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I had kind of one that I was thinking about more as like a more on a kind of general scale. But I had a guy come in, and he was a runner, and he was having, he was having some like patellar tendon pain.
Mhm.
He had basically kind of just persisted through previous marathon and came out, and his patellar tendon was on fire. You know, he was having a lot of pain, unable to run really, and went to the doctors, and they suggested essentially just not running, take a couple weeks off, and then get back into it. Um, didn't work. He tried to get back into it and essentially couldn't do it. And then so came to me, and we got talking, and we developed some strategies to try to ease him back into running. And so what that kind of looked like was we decided upon an amount of pain that was acceptable during the run. It was something fairly low. It was around 3 or 4. And he would log kind of, his runs and how much pain he had during them. And since he was a triathlete, he would do the same thing for his biking and his swimming. We also introduced some like some loading for the tendon as an aside, but he would do walk runs instead of bull runs. And then what we would do is each week uh, we would collect the data and just kind of see, is he doing okay with this? Are there any weird spikes in like how much pain he's having? Is he tolerating the increases? And we eventually just shrunk the amount of walking in the run until he was able to do the amount that he needed to for his race. Uh,
Which was
were you
how
gonna say something?
much? Like how much was that?
I think it was 10K that he had to run. I'm not sure whether it was like a triathlon. I think it was a triathlon, but it wasn't like a full one or something like that.
Hmm.
I'm not sure. I don't do them, so I can't remember the exact
You only you only
numbers.
you only deadlift, bro.
But I knew he had to run 10K,
Okay.
so that was kind of the idea. Is we just needed to build, and so a lot of that was establishing like strategies for like how do we get him back into running, right?
Yeah.
So that was kind of
So
the idea.
as you shrunk the walk time and increased the run time, you're still monitoring symptoms like on that agreed upon pain.
Mm-hmm.
And then as he gradually started to increase running, he was able to keep those pain level in within that acceptable zone as you were got him back to the normal running.
Exactly.
Cool.
Yeah, and it worked out. Not saying it would work out for everybody, right? Like,
No, it's a
but
specific, yeah. That
the
approach, the
idea,
overall approach of like not just taking away the running or saying rest and then try to go back to running, you know.
exactly, because you're getting into also like this is this person's life. That's what he do. That's what he does.
Right.
He's probably okay with running with a little bit of pain.
Yeah. And that's a good point because my next thing was going to be like so he runs the race, right? And he's good. Like he completes it. You said he did pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
Um what does after that look like? Like, were you guys done after that? Like, once you got him back to his race, you're like, peace, see you later.
Well, the
Did you
good
guys
thing with
continue to work on, you know, stuff to maybe gain more control of like his irritation levels, or you know what I'm saying?
I think in that situation, like with something like a tendon, I think you're always going to be managing it. Like that's part of like being like that level of an athlete.
Yeah,
And
no,
so if you're kind of setting someone up for failure if you're having them expect that they should never have that tendon pain throughout their training. But what you can do is put them in the driver's seat and have them show them how they can vary their training occasionally, show them how to deload, show them how to build like capacity and attendance. So
awesome.
I let them go after that actually.
No, I like that, because that was gonna be my next thing is like how do you go on after that? Like obviously he wanted to run this race, so you gave him the strategies to run it, but then giving him more understanding of how he can manage those things on his own, because maybe it is a good idea for him to not necessarily stop running altogether, but maybe he needs to take some time to deload, like you're saying, and back off his volume to maybe even lower that irritation of that tendon down before he ramps back up for, let's say, another competition, or his like I don't know if he's doing like a certain amount of races in a row that's like his competitive season or whatnot. So like those are conversations obviously that you can have with someone too, right?
Yeah, I think that comes down to like understanding that, especially with someone who's like an athlete like that, like it's important to actually take time to like a lot of our sessions we're sitting there talking about those things and writing things down, like showing, like teaching him how to log and manage his training stress, right? And so like, hey, like, maybe after the race you kind of dial it back, like, and showing him that he was able to not run 10K every time and still succeed in the race.
Right.
So it's like a lot of like strategy building and giving him the tools to keep track of his own training and progress and make decisions.
Right. What do you think allowed you to take that approach?
Well, it was right after we went to Dr. Jake Harden's course, actually.
Shout out.
So
if you haven't taken Prehab 101, you definitely should take that course. It was a great course.
Excellent course. But yeah, and I think just kind of, I think personal experience helped me a little bit too, because I powerlift and I know how empowering it is when you have an awareness of like your progress and you keep track of it. And I'm not necessarily like a proponent of like always keeping track of like how much pain you're having and stuff, but at least if you're like a high level athlete, like knowing how much you've been running and how much training stress you have, and then maybe adjusting that if like you're feeling really fatigued, and understanding also like how other variables can impact your fatigue and your performance too. That kind of gave me the confidence with helping him go through his process, because I know that's been helpful for me. So that's where I think it's valuable to try striving for like a competition or something as like a physical therapist or any sort of like health professional, to actually go through that kind of process yourself and see the ups and downs, to understand a little bit better like what the person might be going through.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's a good point. Yeah, and I think it's an overall, I don't know, like the approach can be translated to many different things, right? Like you used it for an athlete who's trying to run a triathlon, right? But like on the flip side, we can kind of talk about an experience that I had that's a little bit different, but is kind of along the same lines, in the sense of like not completely eliminating something and giving them options and gradually exposing them and having them build up tolerance to be able to complete the activity that they want to do.
Yeah.
Right. So like for me, I was I was working with a lady, an older lady. She was experiencing some back pain. It was very like flexion based discomfort. Um, she had it for a bit, and we had been working together for like a couple weeks. So we already kind of set the basis of like understanding like pain as a sensitivity, and that like just because she's been like bending over is not necessarily like a terrible thing, and that she can't bend over, but right now it's just a position that she's not like tolerating, and we need to find other ways to expose her to that position without kind of flaring her up type stuff, right? So we were working on a lot of those things, and she was getting better. And so I always like to ask, like, what is there that you're still doing in your daily life that, you know, is causing you discomfort or you're having trouble with, right? And the one thing that she had said from the start and continued to say was like vacuuming her stairs. And this is something like she was adamant about vacuuming her stairs, man. Like I told her, tell your husband to do it. But like, no, it was something that she really, you know, she liked to keep her house clean, man. So like
She got that new Dyson vacuum.
Yeah.
She just had to get it done.
Right. And so at this point, like the one thing that was still bothering her a lot was vacuuming her stairs, and she was doing it with like a little handheld vacuum that required her to be in a flexed position for the set of stairs, and it was bothering her. So we kind of talked, and again, we did the same thing. We came up with an idea. We came up with this: what is an acceptable like level of discomfort that you feel comfortable with, you know, and that's not going to cause you to be super aggravated for the rest of the day, you know. And we agreed upon that, and then I just gave her some strategy. So the strategy that we used was I had her doing some squatting to the floor and stuff already, so we knew that squatting down was something that didn't bug her as when she was bending over. And so I can't remember the number of stairs that she had off the top of my head, but we came up with some plan where it was like every fifth step she would bend over to clean the step, instead of for the first four she would squat down and clean. So the first four she would squat down and clean. The fifth step she would round her back, in air quotations, round her back and vacuum the stairs. And then the next five she would squat, and then we get to the landing and she would take a little rest, and then she would go down the rest of the set of stairs. The same kind of idea, and we would have her do that over the course of a couple of times that she cleaned the stairs, and then gradually just increase the amount of times she would bend over instead of squat to clean the stairs, until she got to the point where she was able to complete all of the stairs with very little to no discomfort.
Man, that's actually so hype.
Yeah, and she was pumped about it, bro. She was pumped about it because like she wanted to do it. And the thing is like she probably could have just squatted down and done all the stairs, you know, but like the point of it was to kind of prove to her too that like bending over and rounding your back is not something that you should be afraid of. And it's not the reason why you had your back pain in the first place, in the sense of it as it's a bad position, like we kind of talked about. It might have like it wasn't really her back injury, I don't think was related to her bending over the stairs, but like that flexion position was something that she was just really sensitive to at the time, and that required her to be in that position for a longer period of time, which aggravated her. So it kind of proved to her that like it's not that rounding your back is bad. It's just when you get aggravated and you have high sensitivity levels, it's just a good idea to have more options to move. You know what I mean? And I even told her, I'm like, hey, you know what? Maybe it's not a bad idea to mix it up a bit, you know, like bend over and then for a couple stairs and then squat a couple stairs. You know what I mean? Just in general, just to give her the movement options, bro.
One thing I had a question for you, because I think we both kind of said it, but you asked her, you know, you guys came up together with and agreed upon like amount of discomfort that would be okay.
Mm-hmm.
How do you go about that conversation, and what's your reasoning for doing it that way?
Yeah, I think the reasoning off the bat is to just set the idea that pain, like increases in pain or pain in itself, is doesn't mean that you're doing more harm to yourself necessarily, right? Like, it's not something that to be scared of. It's just something at this time that's telling you, hey, maybe this position isn't something that your body wants to do right now, or for whatever reason you're very sensitive to this. And sorry, what was the second part of your question? It was like, how do you go about like having the conversation?
Yeah, and why are you kind of not just setting the limit yourself? I guess.
Right. One of the reasons why like I don't set the limit myself is because I don't know what I don't know what they're experiencing. So I make sure that that set like off the top is like, this is your body, this is your experience, this isn't mine. So like I can't I can't rate it for you or come up with like, hey, don't go higher than like 6 out of 10 pain. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's more like how kind of we it's more on them and what they feel comfortable with doing. So how I usually come up with it, and I think in that example is like I had her doing like different movements and things already, where like, one movement she had done that brought her pain levels up pretty high, let's say like 7 out of 10, and then I had her doing other things that she rated as like lower down on the pain scale. And I asked her, like, are you comfortable with moving in this position or doing things with that level of discomfort? Like, do you feel safe doing this, or do you feel confident that this pain level is okay for you to continue to do what you're doing at? And she said yes. I thought that's fine. And then there's times where I've had people say no, like I don't want to do that, right? So that's how I usually do it. I'm sure there's a million ways to go about doing it, but I usually try to have like take tangible examples from our session to then like reinforce as we go through.
Yeah, totally. I think that like gives the person a little bit more of a sense of control and self-efficacy with their pain,
Mm-hmm.
which we know is a huge indicator of like success, just understanding like, oh, okay, I can change this and I'm in control of like how much pain I'm willing to have during this.
Mm-hmm.
Because on the flip side, like setting a crazy expectation, like you're not allowed to have any pain,
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of cases, is probably not realistic.
Right. No, it's not, because you're going to have discomfort, right? Like most of the time when you're doing things. So,
Exactly. But if you can kind of scale it and keep it within like a tolerable range, like then there you go.
yeah. And it gives you a better idea of how that person like how they're viewing what they're going through, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
if they're not cool with, working at like a low level, like let's say a 2 out of 10, they're like, nah, I'm not good with that. Then it kind of gives you an idea of like how they view it, or maybe like they're not ready yet to try something that's going to cause them even a little bit of aggravation, right? So it just gives you a little bit more information as to like how you can go about it. Because sometimes it's not necessarily, I mean, maybe some of my experiences is like it's not necessarily good to like push that person to be like, no, it's okay. Like sometimes I think you need to do that, but sometimes people aren't ready to do that yet, and it kind of just depends on the situation.
Yeah, totally. The other thing I kind of noticed is like your thought process is still biomechanically driven. Like your reasoning for having her squat and do that was still a biomechanical thought process. So it's still useful to like have that understanding of like if someone is sensitive to certain loads or certain positions, then you can still use that to guide where you might go with your when you're planning your like exercises you're going to do or even like activity modifications.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Like I think I mean, biomechanics is important, right? And like having and knowing like, if someone's squatting down, they're more likely to be in a less rounded back, or let's say a more neutral spine position than they would be if they're just bending over. And that's a good movement option for them at that time, right? It's important. It's the same thing that goes with certain like knee dominant or hip dominant movements. Like I mean, I know you've had to do this before and I've had to do it before, but like going like squatting, you know what I mean? Like going from a
Mhm.
more like knee dominant squat to a more hip dominant squat by going to a box and, you know, maybe using more of a low bar stance where it's more hip dominant than doing something that's more of a high bar stance. It's going to be more knee dominant, or, you know, something along those lines, right? Like that's just under like kind of understanding that, you know, the way that you move does matter if those positions are sensitive.
Exactly. And so that's where like having an awareness of how to modify those things, how to coach people through that, and but then also like the language that you're going to use, the reasoning for why you're doing it, is probably even more important than the exercise themselves.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure, for sure, and that comes back to that movement optimism, right? You're always like, there's no like trying to just be more positive with the way people move, because everyone moves so differently, bro. Like
Mhm.
you like you'll see someone come in and you'll be like, I don't know, like you would expect this person's squat to not feel good, but they feel fine. So it's like, you know, it's not like being too nitpicky when you don't have to be.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too that kind of complicates it, is like you want to have those options, but sometimes even though it makes logical sense, the person in front of you may not respond the way you might think they will.
Yeah.
And so you can't let your feeling that they should be tolerating this biomechanically based off of the assessment affect how they're actually responding.
Mm.
You know, like for a practical like example of that, like for example, you would think switching to a low bar position would offload the knees a little bit versus a high bar. But what if someone is so stressed out by this new, uh, for example, Dalton Lano
Yeah.
doesn't like the low bar squat, that maybe that actually makes your knee feel worse.
Yeah,
And
bro.
so guess what we're not going to do? We're
Yeah.
not going to low bar squat.
Yeah.
Right?
Then you just sit there and you're like, oh shit, what do I do now, bro? That's happened to like, oh,
Traction.
let's just reverse lunge instead of forward lunge, because that'll help. That'll probably feel better because your knee's not going so much forward. And then they're like, this makes me way worse.
Yeah.
And you're
And
just like,
that's where you got to have backup
you're
plans.
like sweating. You're like, oh god, what do I do now?
Let's be real. That's probably most of the time, right, Dalton?
Yeah, 100%.
But it does happen though, and
No,
that's
it does. And
important
then
to know.
you just figure out, okay, how can we adjust other variables? Is there another position we can put this person in? Is there another modification that I can use to try to get this person? And maybe at that time, that squat is not the way you're going to load the knee,
Mm-hmm.
and you just find another way that you're going to start to load knee flexion in a way that is safe and appropriate for them. And that just
Right.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Or you can change another variable that's not even like a modification. Like for example, I had a guy that, he was having trouble with push-ups, but when I actually dove deeper and I asked him how many push-ups he was doing 30 at once.
Right.
So instead of doing 30 at once, we just broke it up into sets of 5.
Yeah, that's a
Right?
good point, man. Instead of
He's
like,
changing the volume.
because then instead of overthinking something and being like, oh, it's the way that your left pinky is, because if you don't keep your left pinky this way, it's gonna throw your muscles out of alignment. You're not gonna be able to do push-ups.
You're using way too much flexor carpi ulnaris.
Okay, just to wrap up though, one thing I want to touch on is like, when there's obviously times where you're gonna have to tell someone, no, I don't think it's a good idea that you go and continue doing this activity. Like that does happen, right? Like I think both of us have been in that scenario where we first and foremost always try to keep the person doing what they want to do, in some capacity. But there's obviously times where they might not be able to do that. So in your opinion, and then I can kind of chime in a little bit, is like, how have you gone about dealing with that situation? And what are a couple of things maybe that you use to make sure that this person understands that it's not forever?
Yeah, well, just on that last point, like you've got to make sure that you're explaining that this isn't, forever. This is a temporary thing, but then highlighting that you've got a plan. And I think bonus if you can have an objective measure to show them,
Mm-hmm.
and to justify why you're eliminating the activity. Um, Good example of that is I had someone with forearm pain, and we had an objective measure with a pain-free grip strength test, where we had her grip as much as she could without having pain. And it was a large difference with the painful side versus non-painful side. And then she asked if she should go do a bunch of gripping stuff on the weekend. And it's probably not going to kill her, but it's probably not going to be helpful either. And so I recommended not yet. And I had an objective measure to back it up. And then we covered how we were going to get her grip strength up. And that once it's closer to the other side, we can start doing some things like that.
Yeah. And I think just to build off that, like once you start getting her closer, you could probably then take some of those modified activities that you have an idea of and implement them to then again reinforce and show her, hey, we're taking the steps to getting you back to doing exactly what you want to do.
That's right. I think you gotta probably weigh the risk reward, right? And if the risk of it, like, is it going to be a net negative? Is there like a high likelihood of that being, leading to some type of a flare up? Then you have to kind of like weigh that in your mind based off like your assessment.
Right. Like when to do that or if you should. Yeah. Yeah. And then when you get to that point where you're trying to implement some of those new activities again to get her back, it's important to be transparent with the fact that like, hey, there's a potential that you are going to flare up,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to work together to find that balance of load and volume, to allow you to do some of these things, within reason. So like that's another, I think, good thing to consider.
Yes, setting the expectations there that it's not going to be a smooth ride, because if you assume it's going to go perfectly and that it doesn't, guess whose fault that is?
It's yours, Will. It's all your fault, bro.
It's all my fault.
Yeah, no, that's good, man. I really I think that was a good conversation, and it's kind of cool to see that post come up again, because that was a pretty popular post for us back in a year ago, and it's kind of cool to see it kind of come back around, and now here we are having another conversation about it.
Shows how little we've grown since then, Dalton. I'm just kidding.
Man. Yeah, you're right, bro. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, man. Anything else you want to add?
No, I don't think so.
Cool.
How about you?
No, I think that was good, man. Yeah, guys, hopefully you enjoyed that, took something away from it. If you did, shoot us a message. Let us know what you learned. If you have other strategies or ways that you modify or you do things, please send us a message. If you have any experiences where you've implemented these strategies and you've had them work or you've had them fail, let us know. We're trying to learn every day just like you are, and having these conversations and getting insights from other people is how we all grow. So yeah, shoot us a DM or an email, or if you have Will's number, just give him a call.
Yeah, and like if you're like a student or something and you're like, what the heck is this like movement optimism stuff? Or, how do I know like whether it's okay to like exercise into pain or something like that? Reach out to us and we'll shoot you to some resources.
Yeah, I think maybe we'll even post some of that maybe in the show notes of this, like some of the stuff that we read or where we got like a lot of that information with, which is basically a lot from Greg Lieben. But
yeah.
Yeah, we'll link up some stuff. All right, guys, that's all we got for today. If you want to find us on social, you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at the MVMT PTs. You can email us themovementpts@gmail.com. Please head over to iTunes, subscribe, drop us a review. And if you enjoyed any one of our episodes, please share it with another person. We appreciate the support. And last but not least, we'll plug the OG blend because it is the original coffee of rehab and you all should be drinking it. You can find it on our Instagram page. In the bio, there's a link to our website where you can get a bag, and we'll also link it up in the show notes for you guys to have. If you are drinking the OG blend, send us some pictures. We love it, and we hope you guys are all enjoying it. All right. Peace.